Nkechi Obesai sat quietly at the long, shiny mahogany table, surrounded by her fiancé's rich and well-dressed family. The room smelled of expensive perfume and roasted chicken, laughter echoing from every corner, but not a single laugh was for her. The Okoros looked perfect, polished, proud, and full of quiet judgment. Their designer clothes sparkled under the chandelier, and every word they spoke seemed to remind her she didn't belong. She tried to smile, pretending not to notice the way they whispered behind their glasses of wine. Her fingers played nervously with her napkin, as she listened to their stories about vacations in Paris and business meetings in Dubai. No one asked about her. No one cared. Even Chijioke, her fiancé, seemed too busy impressing them to notice her silence. Still, Nkechi kept her head high. Her late mother's voice echoed in her mind. "Never let anyone make you feel small, my daughter." She took a deep breath and looked around the table, reminding herself that grace was her armor. They might see her as an outsider, but she knew something they didn't. She was far more than the quiet girl they were trying to humiliate. The laughter around the table grew louder, but the jokes weren't funny anymore. They were sharp and aimed straight at her. One of the aunts leaned closer to another and whispered just loud enough for Nkechi to hear. Chijioke really found himself a simple girl. The other aunt chuckled, swirling her wine glass. I just hope she at least knows how to serve water properly. These village girls can surprise you." Their laughter cut through her like a knife. Nkechi's heart tightened, but she didn't show it. She kept her smile small and polite, even as her hands trembled under the table. She could feel every pair of eyes on her, judging her dress, her accent, her calmness. Someone joked about girls who come from nowhere trying to marry into good families. Another said, "Love is blind until the bills arrive." The table erupted in laughter again. Nkechi swallowed hard. Her throat burned, but she refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Chijioke sat beside her, pretending not to hear. He smiled weakly, trying to avoid confrontation. That hurt the most, his silence. She wanted him to speak up, to defend her, to remind them she was the woman he loved. But he just stared at his plate. Inside, her late mother's words came back to her like a whisper. "Grace, my daughter. Even when they try to break you, wear your grace like a crown." So she straightened her back, looked at the table and softly said, "I may be simple, but I was raised with respect." Her voice was calm, but her eyes held quiet fire. The room fell silent for a moment. Awkward, heavy, uncomfortable. Then the aunt forced a laugh, trying to brush it off. But Nkechi saw the discomfort in their faces. They didn't expect her to have dignity, to speak with strength. She smiled gently, turned to sip her water, and told herself silently, one day, they'll understand who they're talking to. The servants began placing plates of jollof rice, roasted chicken, and steaming soup on the table. The air was filled with rich smells, but Nkechi's appetite was long gone. She sat quietly, her eyes fixed on her plate, praying the evening would just end peacefully. But peace was never what the Okoros had in mind. One of the cousins, a tall, arrogant man in a designer shirt, looked at her and smirked. "Poor girl," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "This is not really your kind of table. Maybe you should eat later when we're done." The room froze. Forks stopped moving. Even the laughter died midair. Nkechi felt her chest tighten. Her hands shook under the table, but she forced herself to stay calm. She turned to Chijioke, hoping, just hoping, he would say something. Defend her. Stop the humiliation. But he didn't. He stared at his food, pretending not to notice, his cowardice screaming louder than words. Then the eldest aunt, the same one who had been giving her sharp looks all evening, set her wine glass down and said coldly, "Please, young lady, leave the table. This dinner is for family." The words hit her like a slap. Everyone's eyes were now on her. Her heart raced, her face burned, but she didn't want them to see her break. Slowly, she placed her napkin on the table and stood up. "Excuse me," she said softly, her voice calm but trembling at the edges. As she walked away, she could feel their smug stares following her. People who thought money made them better. But what they didn't know, what none of them could even imagine, was that the roof above their heads didn't belong to them. It belonged to her. Her late father's voice echoed in her mind. "Never explain your worth to people who measure it with gold." Nkechi walked out of that dining room with her head high. She left in silence, but that silence carried the weight of a storm they weren't ready for. For her not caps or no I bid no blue answer today, let me you hope me at the I went the dish, Nemon Bata. See me am fire. They are breath vahnig. Flosser who's derp soon at therapy dish. Sir, is derf with no wooden skim. See for the sear in the oak with the asla. And I are sick on the bring it all. Hail of sear, but I wish that he's a gelser off iller for the so if a lot. Sir, it's said milk in the name. That no fits real nation, mad my resolve. Where's so in it? Heard nang it is through Zuho and the Vinoid. Derp so veil. Nyammernet. Her another ever with us who hope be full of more with the capital net. Sir, is dash nothing in silk zaar. Hail else the her nerdish. Sterker was no lessons wish though. Twalish name was a hip. He's lord was a hip on. Skater her. Nemo murph softbish. Yeah, word that she resha. He didn't get what he merged well, so else no lessons new cat. Her old full brown but snake is her. And where he smith ellis to for resha. He left bad steep. All best in the fair work always night even in earth stechen. Here if the silk must wish that I had visit. He'll dark lamps through the up, say are the us. Alf burn no one. Care profit with the rich get the ma groups through wood. He'll fast that ish. Aim sweet skin. Sylvan murder he that's it near. Thar well sick dish. Square perhaps netting it must name on the wet. Snail fax is skiffet minister. Hurry if the mesh full of safes in I Billy. Say your him the wind of git. And a shale me sit pats it. Get my sis ya earth on my hang get bill us. Her caster say what do off this name. Squash dish it delish. But I get Mr. Loudon the dish. Her old for the stuff in the parlor, Murph built in the panner. Her ishter Murph but it's shale else scushna see stechen. That mansion everyone bragged about, the one filled with luxury and pride, didn't belong to the Okoros at all. It was hers. Nkechi Obe's size. The very walls that echoed with their insults had been built by her late father, Chief Obinna Obesai, a man whose name once carried power and respect across Nigeria. Years ago, he had designed that mansion himself, down to the last detail, the marble staircase imported from Italy, the mahogany dining table from Ghana, the grand chandelier from France. He had built it as a gift to his wife and only daughter, calling it the Obesai Home of Grace. When he passed away, the world mourned a legend. Obesai Holdings, his real estate company, grew even bigger after his death, expanding across Africa under trusted management. But what people didn't know was that he had left everything, every property, every share, every account, to his only child, Nkechi. She had become the quiet heiress of an empire, though she never flaunted it. After her father's funeral, she made a promise to herself and her mother's memory. I will live simply. I will earn respect for who I am, not for what I have. That's why she never told Chijioke or his family about her inheritance. She wanted love, not status. She wanted to be seen for her heart, not her last name. But now, as she stood outside that same mansion, the same one her father built with love, she realized how cruel life could be. The people who insulted her were sitting under her father's roof, eating dinner at her family's table, laughing at his daughter. Tears filled her eyes, but she smiled through them. If only Papa were here, she whispered. He'd tell me to rise with grace. And that's exactly what she decided to do. She wouldn't shout. She wouldn't seek revenge. She would let the truth reveal itself, silently, beautifully, and powerfully, just like her father taught her. Chijioke had always been kind, gentle, and soft-spoken, the kind of man who smiled easily and avoided arguments. That was what first drew Nkechi to him. He made her laugh, made her feel seen, and promised to love her for who she was. But kindness without courage, she was learning, could be dangerous. Kindness without strength could destroy a woman's heart. From the beginning, his mother never liked her. She had looked at Nkechi with thinly veiled disgust and said once, "My son is doing charity work by dating you." The words had cut deep, but Nkechi chose to let them go. She believed love could heal pride. She told herself that if she stayed humble, his family would one day see her heart. She endured the side comments, the fake smiles, the forced politeness, all for the man she loved. But that night at the dining table changed everything. When Chijioke sat silently as his relatives insulted her, something inside her broke. It wasn't just his silence, it was his fear. He looked at her like a stranger, afraid to defend her because he didn't want to upset his family. And in that moment, Nkechi saw the truth. He wasn't her protector. He was their puppet. After she left the table, she waited, thinking maybe he'd come after her, apologize, or at least call her name. But he didn't. He stayed inside, pretending everything was fine, while she stood outside in the cold night, holding back tears. She finally understood that love means nothing without respect. You can give your heart to someone, but if they can't stand beside you when the world turns cruel, then what you have isn't love, it's weakness. That night, standing under the stars, Nkechi whispered to herself, "I deserve more." And for the first time she truly believed it. The next morning the sun rose quietly over Abuja, painting the sky in soft gold and pink. Nkechi sat on her small balcony with a cup of tea, her mind still heavy from the night before. The voices from that dinner echoed in her head, the laughter, the insults, and most painfully Chijioke's silence. She felt tired, but deep inside, a strange calm had replaced her hurt. It was as if something inside her had shifted, a quiet strength she didn't know she still had. Her phone began to ring. She glanced at the screen. It was Mr. Kalu, her father's old lawyer. She hadn't spoken to him in months. She took a deep breath and answered, her voice steady but soft. "Good morning, Mr. Kalu." "Good morning, Madam Nkechi," he said warmly. "I wanted to inform you. The property transfer is complete. The Okoro mansion is now officially under your name. Your late father's acquisition has been finalized. All documents are ready for your signature." For a few seconds she couldn't speak. The same house where she was humiliated just hours ago, the same house her fiancé's family treated her like an intruder, now legally belonged to her, felt almost poetic. Destiny's quiet justice. A small smile spread across her face as she looked out at the morning light. "Perfect timing," she whispered, her voice calm but full of meaning. "Would you like me to deliver the documents today?" the lawyer asked. "Yes," she said softly. "Please do." When the call ended, Nkechi sat in silence for a while, her heart peaceful for the first time in days. She thought of her father, strong, wise, and proud, and whispered, "Papa, you always knew when the truth needed to show itself." At that moment she didn't feel angry anymore. She didn't need to prove anything. Life had already done it for her. The people who made her feel small were about to learn who she really was, and she wouldn't need to raise her voice to do it. A week later, the Okoros decided to host another family brunch. This time, a big event filled with wealthy friends, business partners, and socialites. They called it a welcome party for an important investor visiting from Lagos. The mansion was decorated beautifully, fresh flowers in golden vases, soft music playing, servants moving around with trays of champagne. It was meant to be a perfect show of class and power. But the truth was, they were still celebrating under a roof that no longer belonged to them. Of course, they didn't invite Nkechi. After that humiliating dinner, they had quietly erased her from every family conversation. In their eyes, she was gone. Another mistake Chijioke would soon get over. But destiny, as always, had its own plan. That morning, as Nkechi stood before her mirror, she didn't see the quiet, timid girl they mocked. She saw the daughter of Chief Obena Obesai, confident, calm, and in full control. She wore a stunning gold Osuoke gown that shimmered in the sunlight, her head wrapped in a perfectly tied gele that framed her proud face. Her makeup was soft but powerful, the look of a woman who had nothing to prove, yet everything to show. When she stepped out of her car in front of the mansion, people turned to look. Conversations paused. Even the guards, who once ignored her, quickly bowed in respect. The air seemed to shift, quiet, heavy, electric. She walked toward the entrance with slow, graceful steps, her heels clicking on the marble floor. Inside, laughter filled the room until someone gasped softly, "Is that Nkechi?" Every eye turned toward her. She smiled politely, her eyes steady and calm. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice gentle but commanding. "I hope I'm not late." The room fell silent. In that moment, without raising her voice, Nkechi owned every breath in that space. The same woman they once asked to leave the table had just walked back into her own house, not as a guest but as the true owner. The moment Nkechi stepped through the glass doors, the entire room seemed to pause. Conversation stopped mid-sentence, and laughter turned into awkward silence. The clinking of glasses faded as all eyes shifted toward her. The bright afternoon sun streamed through the wide windows, catching the shimmer of her gold Osuoke gown. She looked radiant, elegant, calm, and untouchable. The same aunt who had mocked her at the dinner almost dropped her wine glass. Her jaw tightened as she whispered, "What is she doing here?" The other guests, unsure of what was happening, exchanged confused looks. Some smiled politely, thinking she was just another invited guest. But the Okoro family knew better. They hadn't invited her. And yet, here she was walking in like royalty. Nkechi's steps were slow and graceful. Every movement carried quiet confidence. She didn't rush, didn't look nervous. She simply owned the moment. Her perfume filled the air, soft and expensive, matching the calm authority in her presence. When she reached the center of the room, she smiled gently at the aunt who had spoken. "I believe," she said, her voice smooth and steady, "I'm right where I belong." Her words hung in the air like music, calm but powerful, polite but piercing. A few guests turned to look at each other, whispering, "Who is she?" someone asked. "She looks familiar." Another muttered, "She carries herself like a queen." The Okoro family tried to force smiles, pretending everything was fine. Chijioke looked stunned, his glass trembling slightly in his hand. His mother's face hardened, but she said nothing. Nkechi walked further in, greeting a few guests with gentle nods. "Good afternoon," she said warmly. "I hope everyone is enjoying the event." Her tone was peaceful, but something about her calm made the entire room uneasy. She wasn't the poor girl they remembered. She was the woman they underestimated. And though they didn't know it yet, this gathering wasn't theirs anymore. Kek. As Nkechi stood gracefully in the middle of the room, people still whispering, the atmosphere grew tense. The Okoro family tried to act normal, forcing smiles for their high society guests, but confusion lingered like a heavy fog. Just then, a young waiter approached her politely, holding a folder and a pen in his hand. "Good afternoon, Madam Owner," he said softly, bowing slightly. "Please, your signature is needed for the event bill." The room went completely silent. It was as if time froze. Every single person turned to look at the waiter, then at Nkechi. The word Madam Owner echoed in the air like thunder. "Madam what?" one of the uncles asked, his voice cracking in disbelief. The waiter, looking a bit nervous, repeated clearly, "Madam Owner, sir. This property and the entire estate belong to Miss Nkechi Obei-sai." A glass slipped from someone's hand and shattered on the marble floor. The aunt who had mocked her earlier nearly dropped her wine again, her face pale with shock. Guests began to murmur, unsure if they had heard correctly. Chijioke's eyes widened. "Nkechi, what is he talking about?" he asked, his voice shaking slightly. Nkechi didn't rush to answer. She simply smiled, that soft, calm, confident smile that came from knowing the truth was finally speaking for her. She took the pen from the waiter, signed the paper elegantly, and handed it back. "Thank you," she said kindly. "Please make sure everything runs smoothly." "Yes, madam," the waiter replied, bowing again before walking away. You could hear the guests whispering. "She owns the mansion? Is she serious? Wait, the Okoros don't own this place?" Nkechi looked around at all their shocked faces, her heart steady. She had no anger left, just quiet satisfaction. The same people who made her feel small were now standing speechless in her house. She turned to them gently and said, "Please don't stop your party. I insist, make yourselves comfortable. In my home." The room that had been full of chatter and laughter just moments ago fell into a heavy, uncomfortable silence. You could almost hear hearts beating faster. The Okoro family sat frozen, their fake smiles fading one by one. Even Chijioke, who had once been her biggest dream, now looked at her like he was seeing her for the very first time. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. His face turned pale, and his hand trembled as he set his glass down. The eldest aunt, the one who had asked her to leave the dinner table, blinked rapidly, her face stiff with shock. "There must be some mistake," she said weakly, trying to laugh. But the waiter had already left after confirming what everyone now knew. The mansion, the grand estate, the luxury they bragged about, it all belonged to Nkechi Obei-sai. Nkechi stood calmly in the center of the room, her gold osso-oak gown glowing under the chandelier. She didn't rush to explain or justify herself. Instead, she reached for the folder on the table, flipped to the last page of the property document, and signed her name slowly and gracefully. Every stroke of her pen felt like poetic justice. When she was done, she smiled gently and handed the file back to the stunned event manager. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady and kind. "Please make sure everyone is comfortable in my home." The words landed like thunder. "In my home." Gasps rippled through the room. Some of the guests tried to hide their surprise, while others stared openly, unable to believe what they were witnessing. Chijioke finally spoke, his voice shaking. "Nkechi, you never told me." She looked at him calmly and replied, "You never asked." Then she turned her gaze toward his family, still frozen in disbelief. In that moment, Nkechi didn't need revenge or raised voices. Her power was in her peace. The same woman they once humiliated was now standing tall, calm, and untouchable, owning not just the house but her dignity. Nkechi stood still for a moment, letting the silence linger. Every pair of eyes in the room was fixed on her, shocked, confused, and embarrassed. Then, with a quiet breath, she turned to face them. Her voice was calm, soft, but carried a weight that filled every corner of the room. "My father bought this mansion years ago," she began. "Chief Obina Obesai, maybe some of you have heard of him. He built this home long before the Okoros ever moved in. When he passed away, everything he owned was left to me." A few guests gasped softly. The Okoro family looked like the ground had been pulled out from under them. Chijioke's mother's lips trembled, her eyes darting toward the walls as if seeing them for the first time. Nkechi continued, her tone steady and graceful. "I didn't correct anyone before. I thought staying humble would earn me respect. I thought people would see my heart, not my background. But I was wrong. In your world, respect only comes when there's money attached to your name." Her words were not angry. They were honest, full of quiet truth. She looked around the room, her eyes meeting each of theirs. "You judged me because I didn't show what I had. You mistook humility for weakness. But strength isn't loud. Sometimes it just waits for the right moment to speak." No one said a word. The air felt thick, almost sacred. Even the guests who didn't know her could feel the power in her calmness. She smiled softly, her eyes glistening. "I never wanted to embarrass anyone," she said gently. "I just wanted you to understand. A woman's worth isn't measured by what she wears, or where she comes from. It's in how she carries herself when the world tries to shame her." Her words cut deeper than anger ever could. The same table that once silenced her now sat speechless before her. And this time it was respect that filled the air. As Nkechi turned to leave, the room stayed frozen in awkward silence. The same people who once laughed at her now couldn't even look her in the eye. Her heels clicked softly against the marble floor. Calm, steady, powerful. Just as she reached the door, one of the aunts, her voice shaky, called out, "Nkechi, please wait, we didn't know." Nkechi stopped. For a moment she didn't turn around. She just stood there, her back straight, her chin high. Then slowly she looked over her shoulder, her eyes calm but sharp. "Exactly," she said softly. "You never cared to know." Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried more weight than any shout could. The aunt's eyes filled with guilt, and Chijioke looked down, unable to meet her gaze. He wanted to speak, but words failed him. His silence, once harmless, now felt heavy, the kind that destroys love. Nkechi gave a small, polite smile. Not bitter, not proud, just peaceful. "I wish you all well," she said simply. And with that, she turned and walked away. Her gold Oseote gown shimmered under the chandelier lights, every thread catching the glow like tiny flames. Each step she took felt like poetry, elegant, powerful, and final. People whispered, some with regret, others in awe. Even the waiter who had spoken earlier watched her go with quiet admiration. She didn't need to raise her voice or seek revenge. Her grace was her revenge. As she stepped outside, a gentle breeze met her, brushing against her face like freedom. The mansion behind her buzzed with confusion and shame, but Nkechi didn't look back. She had walked into that house as someone they mocked, and she was leaving as the woman they would never forget. Her walk wasn't just an exit, it was a statement. Every step said, "You tried to make me small, but I was never meant to fit at your table. I was meant to own it." That night, long after the brunch had ended, someone uploaded a short video clip from the event to social media. Within minutes, it began to spread like wildfire. In the clip, you could see Nkechi standing in her golden Oseote gown, calm and radiant. The waiter approached her politely and said, "Good afternoon, Madam Owner. Your signature is needed for the event bill." The camera captured the stunned faces of the Okoro family, their wide eyes, dropped jaws, and frozen expressions. People everywhere were watching. Comments flooded in. "She's the one who owns the mansion? The poor girl they humiliated just walked in like a queen. Wow. Grace, humility, and power all in one person." The clip was shared thousands of times in just an hour, trending across Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Viewers were mesmerized not just by the reveal, but by the way Nkechi carried herself. She didn't yell. She didn't insult anyone. She didn't need to. Every gesture, every calm smile, every poised step spoke louder than words ever could. People called her story inspiring. "This is how a woman rises with dignity," one comment read. Another said, "She didn't need revenge. Her grace did it for her." Even news outlets picked up the story the next morning, sharing the clip with headlines like, "The poor girl who owned the mansion," and "Abuja heiress turns humiliation into graceful power." The world was watching, captivated by her quiet strength. In the following days, messages poured into Nkechi's phone, strangers praising her courage, telling her she had inspired them to stand up for themselves, to carry themselves with dignity no matter the circumstances. She read them all, smiling softly. For the first time, she realized the true power of her father's lesson. Humility and patience could speak louder than anger, pride, or revenge. Through grace, she had reclaimed not just her inheritance, but the respect she had always deserved. And the world had witnessed it. Weeks later, Nkechi's story had reached every corner of Nigeria. She was featured on the cover of a leading business magazine as the new CEO of Obesi Holdings, the real estate empire her father had built and she had inherited. The article highlighted not just her wealth, but her grace, intelligence, and the quiet strength that had made her rise above humiliation and betrayal. At the photo shoot, she wore a breathtaking emerald gown that shimmered under the studio lights. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup soft yet powerful, and her posture radiated confidence. The photographer clicked away, capturing every angle of a woman who had transformed pain into power. When asked what message she wanted to share with the world, Nkechi smiled gently and said, "Never let anyone make you feel small in a place you were born to own. Stand tall, speak with dignity, and let your strength shine quietly." The magazine's caption summed her journey up perfectly. She didn't raise her voice, she raised her value. Her story went viral again, inspiring thousands of young women across Africa. They shared her photo, her words, her journey from humiliation to triumph. Nkechi looked at herself in the mirror that evening, the emerald gown flowing around her like liquid light. She remembered the dinners, the insults, the moments she had doubted herself. Now she didn't just own a mansion or a company. She owned her story, her power, and her destiny. In that quiet moment, she whispered to herself, "I didn't need to fight to be seen. I just needed to rise." And with that, she smiled fully, confidently, completely.